Next, we finna be talking about why knights always look like they're suffering in games by Gorgiuni. I don't know how to say your name, brother, but shout out to you. Shout out to you, man. And for knight armor, shit, the main game that I remember talking about, not talking about, the main game I remember watching rocking knight armor was Dragon Age Inquisition. That game, or no, before Dragon Age Inquisition, just some Dragon Age game where the dude was like had a cross. He made his own cross out of his own skin. I don't know. It was just wild. It was crazy as hell. But Dragon Age Inquisition, that game was awesome. You could wear any type of armor, and I definitely had some knight armor.
Recently, I came across a lone knight inside a ruined coliseum just before the Ulasil township. He was completely consumed by the abyss, driven into a bloodthirsty rage with a broken arm as a reminder of what he fought so hard to protect. His name was Knight Artorias, a
Really?
warrior suffering for a worthy cause that left him broken and alone. But what makes this truly tragic is this tale is not unique with Artorias. See, something I've noticed is that knights are always suffering. Across multiple games and different genres, there is a knight who is either broken, abandoned, or corrupted. So the question is, why is it that knights in video games always look like they're suffering?
Well, honestly, to get my opinion on this shit, when you become a knight, you sacrifice everything you've known to become this one singular thing. Not a person, not a human. This knight. You're an object and a symbol. You're you're a protector. That's what you will be, will always will be, and will die as. Like, it's simple.
A knight, by definition, is a mounted, heavily armed soldier. But the
Mhm.
key part of that definition is this: a knight serves a feudal lord or king, specifically during the Middle Ages. Now, this was not some casual agreement, right? This was a lifetime of service. What I'm
Mhm.
trying to get at is most knights, if not every single one in video games, are mostly depicted as medieval ones. They
Mhm.
are bound by oath to serve their lord's purpose, whether they agree or not, whether their lord becomes
These Dark Soul
corrupted or
games are
not.
so fucking
This oath
clean.
never specifies that the knight can simply walk away if something happens to their lord. What you'll see is these knights continue their cause long after their lord is gone, physically or mentally. Knight Artorias was one of 4 who served under Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. Gwyn sacrificed his soul to Link the First Flame to prolong the Age of Fire, but as a
Crazy.
result, became a husk of his former self, dooming himself and condemning everyone who swore to protect him. He left his elite knights to suffer alone for centuries. Dragonslayer Ornstein was left guarding the long-forgotten cathedral inside Anor Londo, protecting the chest up ahead. Hawkeye Goff
Yo.
is found inside the locked tower right above the Colosseum where we fight Artorias. He's left there isolated, carving wood and blinded by the residents. Because, racism still exists in Dark Souls. Artorias, as we
That's
know, was
crazy.
consumed by the Abyss. And the last knight, the Lord's Blade, Kiran, left to mourn the death of her dear friend. We can actually
Aw.
find her ring on a corpse behind Knight Artorias' grave, meaning she stayed with him until the very end. The ironic thing about being a knight is, yes, it's a well-respected title for nobility, strength, and respect, but there really is no reward. I mean, it's not like a knight is promised riches or glory, only loyal service. Once that oath is sworn, there's no clause for corruption or the end of the world. Dark Souls 1 is but an appetizer of knights who suffer because of their commitments. So what does this endless duty look like across the series and other video games? Each time I mention Blasphemous,
Holy
I
shit.
realize more and more that the series is all about suffering.
Yeah.
Look, every single character you encounter is in anguish to some degree, including yourself. You play as the Penitent One, the lone survivor of a congregation known as the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow. Every character in this
Crazy.
game has a penitence. Now, if you don't know, penitence is an act of repentance or remorse for wrongdoing. usually involving some form of suffering, sacrifice, punishment, or self-discipline, as a way of seeking forgiveness or spiritual purification. Everyone has their own way of suffering for the miracle. I will never forget, there was this one guy who stitched his dead wife's breast onto his chest to feed his
No
baby, only
way.
for the baby to turn into wax. Now, all
Really?
things considered, that's pretty tame when compared to the rest of this game.
What
The
the hell?
penitent one's suffering is a vow of silence. He does not utter a single word in both games, not so much as a grunt, which makes him quieter than Link from The Legend of Zelda. His sword is named the
shit.
Mea Culpa, translates to through my fault. See, the thing about Blasphemous is suffering is not the byproduct, it's the purpose. Other knights, such as Knight Artorias, are suffering because of the consequences of their servitude. The Penitent One's service is suffering itself. Their whole identity is suffering and allegiance to a bigger cause. Which does bring up a very interesting point. In the universe of Blasphemous, even though it's
Fuck am I
indirectly
watching?
mentioned,
This shit is hard.
individuality is kind of shamed upon. Your whole reason for existing is for the miracle. Who you are, what you do, and anything that pertains to you.
Brother's fighting a sword.
That's why you're simply known
What
as
the
the Penitent
fuck?
One. Our name doesn't really matter, only our suffering. Many knights are simply a vessel for a greater purpose. The Hollow Knight is easily the most clear-cut case of this. He was raised by the Pale King, with only one goal in mind, to seal the power and influence of the Radiance. He's not even technically alive, he's a hollow shell manufactured by the Void and shaped by the Pale King. His entire existence was created for this one objective. It's quite the tragedy knowing this knight was bred for not the joys of life, but to contain an older god. Even then, the current events of Hollow Knight, the game, showcase the failures afterwards. At least with many of these knights, they understood what they were signing up for. The Penitent One willingly accepted the journey ahead and embraced it with open arms. And also a helmet full of blood because, whoa, religious imagery or something. Even whatever her name is, Laxatives, the Complete, from Lies of P, took an oath to serve Simon Manus, leader of the alchemists who believed in evolution. She was one of the first to be baptized by the Holy Elixir, making her the first whole being. Her fight is truly a testament to that because, in my personal opinion, she's one of the best and most difficult fights in the game. Even though most of these knights willingly submit to these higher authorities and holy causes, some fall under the category of slavery.
Damn.
And that's where Virgil's story begins. Virgil's story is a bit out of order because, technically chronologically speaking, Devil May Cry 3 is the first game. At the end of that story, he fights against Demon King Mundus and eventually loses. Now in Devil May Cry 1, we see the aftermath. Throughout the whole game, we are chased by Nilo Angelo, who is actually a brainwashed Virgil, and he's forced to fight his brother Dante several times. Virgil was never meant to technically be a knight, but the moment Mundus imprisoned him inside the Black Knight armor, he became one, and lost pretty much everything that made him Virgil. However, I do want to end this chapter with a knight whose journey was certainly the longest and most arduous.
Slave Knight Gale.
You didn't think I would make a video about knights and forget Slave Knight Gale, now did ya? I mean, this is one of my favorite bosses in video games, and if any knight leads best in the tragedy of this archetype, it's Gale himself. He was given a simple task: find the dark soul of humanity so a new painted world could finally be created. Compared to everything we've talked about thus far, it almost sounds hopeful. The problem is, his mission lasted too long. The world itself ended before he could finish it. Kingdoms collapsed, gods disappeared, entire civilizations were buried beneath ash. We fight him at the end of the world itself, and yet Gale kept walking, searching for the Dark Soul. By the time we finally meet him at the end of the world, he's no longer fighting for himself. He's forgotten everything except the task he was given. Maybe that's why knights always look like they're suffering. They dedicate themselves to causes greater than themselves, and eventually, those causes become all that's left. Slave Knight Gale is perhaps the cruelest fate of them all, which we'll come back to later. But there is still one question that needs to be answered. Why are knights always suffering, and why does it matter?
Let's see. Come on now. The result.
A lord's sins infect the knights that loyally serve him. The king is remembered, but the knights bear the scars.
Mm-hmm.
Let me explain. Sir Alone from Dark Souls 2 can be found within the memory of the old Iron King. He's alone inside a large empty room with very, very clean floors for some reason. Sir Alone left the king after his corruption and greed for power. He now seeks to travel the lands in search of a new kingdom to serve. Whomever they serve, should they fall into a cruel barbaric rule, the knights underneath them suffer the consequences and reflect the current state of that kingdom. Laxatives also carries the sins of her master. Simon Manus believed in evolution, and she was the first to be bathed within the elixir. Sure, it made her more powerful, but it could not erase her love for Manus. Thus, she was deemed a failure, incomplete, which is quite ironic considering her name. And although not exactly the sins of his master, the Hollow Knight was supposed to be the perfect vessel, one without will or emotion, an empty shell to fully contain the radiance. However, the Pale King formed a bond with the Hollow Knight. He raised it as his own, and so it was corrupted. The radiance was able to influence the Hollow Knight through that small connection he had, which leads to the current events of the game. It's strange and tragic to think that a healthy connection with the Pale King led to the demise of many within his kingdom. I mean, a knight, again by definition, should breathe loyalty and an iron will to his cause. But the fact that this is what led to the events of the game is
stabbing
quite the
himself.
contrast. It speaks volumes that during the final stretch of the fight, the Hollow Knight stabs himself to rid the world of this infection. He knows he's failed, so in an act of desperation, he's trying to help the player in exterminating the Radiance. However, this really only answers about half of the knights I've talked about thus far. The sins of their masters certainly can carry over, but in other circumstances, a knight's suffering occurs because they are imprisoned by their servitude. You remember King Vendrick in Dark Souls 2 who went hollow within the Undead Crypt?
Holy
He was so ashamed with what his kingdom had become and how his wife, Nashandra, manipulated him, so he isolated himself from the world. Well, his royal knight, Velstadt, stood guard outside his final chamber. Even after all these years and after his king went hollow, he's still there. Keep in mind, Dark Souls 2 doesn't have an exact calendar for its lore, but we can assume that between now and when the king first locked himself inside that chamber was between like a few decades to a few centuries.
Crazy,
Vendrick
bro.
fell, Velstadt followed. They both eventually went hollow, but a knight's duty is never done, even if you don't serve a master. The penitent one technically is from a dead brotherhood with no king to serve or protect. At this point, he only serves this universe's god, the Miracle, and ironically his task is to defeat said Miracle. But even then, his true master is simply suffering. Blasphemous in general is in a different league when it comes to suffering, misery, and corruption. Look, I've played quite a few games, and I still have a hefty list in my Steam library to, tackle, but I say this without hesitation that the Miracle is one of the cruelest antagonists I've seen in video games. Definitely worthy of his own video at some point. Your crusade is all that matters. All the horrific monsters you face, all of the tragedies you witness, all the suffering you endure is worth it if it means the Miracle is put to rest. That's why a knight suffers, for a cause that is greater than their measly life on a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do want to shift gears and really focus on the story of Slave Knight Gale. Out of all the knights I've gathered for this topic, I think Gale is the best example of why a knight suffers. In the old wars, where the gods would fight against the bleakest of battles, slave knights were sent as fodder, expendable vanguard forces to exhaust enemy ranks. These slave knights were undead warriors, branded by their red hoods and eternal servitude. They could not die, but over countless centuries of fighting, their skin became charred black, their bones broken beyond recognition. And yet there was one slave knight who survived these wars without going hollow, and that was Gale. Eventually he found his way into the painted world and met a young girl, an unnamed painter. He became her fatherly figure. When we talk to her, she refers to him as Uncle Gale. She wishes to create a new world, one without rot, but she needs a specific pigment for her painting, the Dark Soul. Gale swore to collect the Dark Soul for his lady's painting. His journey was long and difficult, and eventually, it would take him to the literal end of the world, and there he would find the Pygmy Lords. They were decrepit and shriveled, nearly dried up of their blood, but Gale was determined. One of them calls out to us, stating that the Red Hood has come to consume them. Which, by the way, I was curious and I just kind of followed him until the end. And I don't actually remember what happens. I think he just died. Anyways, when we find Gale, he's gone mad, eating one of the pygmy lords, still wishing to grant his lady's request. He has become the Dark Soul, and once he's defeated, we can deliver it to the young painter ourselves, who is none the wiser that we killed her uncle. Slave Knight Gale is the most literal definition of a knight's endless service and loyalty. He was literally called a slave knight and fought against wars that were already deemed a lost cause. He was the lone survivor who did not go hollow, which should really highlight just how little the gods cared for them. You would think after centuries of service, Gale would be free, but after meeting the painter, he was chained once again. He embarked on another quest. Again, his journey took him to the end of the world, and only then would he finally be relieved of his duty. And see, that's the thing about knights. Service and loyalty is all that they know. Gale could have easily lived a life on his own, escaped the torment, but instead dedicated the rest of it to someone else. Even when their lord dies or becomes corrupted, knights simply seek out a new master to serve. The same thing happened with Sir Alone. A knight is simply a tool for a higher authority figure to use, and very rarely does their story end happily. That's why a knight always looks like they're suffering, because they never have a choice, or at least they have the illusion of not having a choice. Bound by eternal service, leashed under evil rulers, or corrupted because of a kingdom's demise, a knight is the scar bearing the sins of entire legacies.
That's fucking
And that's
crazy.
all I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I would give you a wet, sloppy kiss.
All right. Brother, I did not consent. But all right, man. This is why knights always look like they're suffering in game. By, I don't know how to say his name, but by Gore. I'm gonna say his name by Gore. Honestly, becoming a knight, you leave everything that you knew behind you, and you just become a servant. You become nothing but just a person that take orders from a leader, a king, a god, or just a simple person that you find that gives you that purpose again to like become a knight, to become a person that takes orders. And it's sad because once you become a knight, that's all you know.